Good evening, friends. Tonight marks the start of a very exciting series of spooky videos I have planned for you all throughout October in honor of Halloween. For tonight's video, I have a scary story that happened right here in Copenhagen. And what's even scarier is that the events I'm about to tell you about really happened. So sit back, relax, and see if you're brave enough to make it to the end of the video, where you can learn about a real Copenhagen horror story. Our story begins in Copenhagen in 1796 with a beautiful young girl called Giertrude Birgitte Bodenhoff. For the sake of the story, I'll use her English name pronunciation, Gertrude. Hailing from a very wealthy family in the upper echelons of Copenhagen's high society, she was married to a man 18 years her senior called Andreas Bodenhoff. Andreas was even richer than Gertrude's family, as he was the largest private ship owner in Copenhagen, with almost half his fleet involved in lucrative foreign trade. His family's fortune included several properties on Nyhavn, the famous Colourful harbour. They at some time either built or lived in numbers 12, 31, 20, and 22. It is here at number 20 that the newlyweds settled in for their happily married lives together. However, tragically, just 5 short months later, Andreas died, leaving Gertrude a widow at the age of just 19. A very, very rich widow. In fact, it is said that she was the richest widow in the whole of Northern Europe at that time. 2 years go by and Gertrude throws herself into charity work around the city, particularly helping poor children, struggling families, and the sick. She was said to personally visit people's homes with food, medicine, clothes, whatever the family needed. Due to this work, she became very much beloved and celebrated amongst the residents of Copenhagen. One story tells where she helped out a family where the mother had died in childbirth, leaving the father, a local gravedigger at the church, alone with an infant and 4 small children to care for. Gertrude lavished the family with help and gifts and was so entrenched in the poor family's fate that she was selected to act as a godmother for the young infant during its christening. It was Gertrude herself who held the baby and dipped its head in the christening well, and she also provided an expensive gold cross as a christening gift. It was said Gertrude had always wanted children of her own, but sadly it was never to be. In 1798, exactly 2 years after her husband died, Gertrude began experiencing some mysterious, excruciating pain. She was said to have a terrible earache, a high fever, and a stiff neck. The doctor was called, who diagnosed it as a simple middle ear infection. He provided some oral morphine drops, a remedy that was extremely commonplace at the time, to help alleviate her pain. Now, with the pain happily at bay, Gertrude laid down to rest. However, later on, when a housemaid came to check on her, the girl was unable to wake Gertrude. Alarmed, the doctor was summoned to the address once more, where he sadly proclaimed Gertrude deceased. Presumably a tragic case of accidental morphine overdose. A priest was then called to see that all the proper last rites were carried out, and the corpse was hastily placed into a coffin and ushered out of the house to the city morgue. Everyone, of course, was terrified at this time that her infection could spread amongst the living, so speed was of the utmost importance. On July 23, 1798, she was laid to rest in the Bodenhoff family grave in Assistens Cemetery in Nyhavn. News of her unexpected, untimely death swept quickly through the city, and understandably, the residents of Copenhagen were devastated. The word also reached the poor gravedigger who Gertrude had helped just months prior. And it was then that an evil plan began to form in his mind. He supposed that the rich widow would be buried with tons of expensive jewelry. He also supposed that, as someone with easy access to the cemetery, it would be simple to just slip in quietly at night, remove her valuables, and bury her once more. And that's just what he did. Some reports state he had friends help him, others report he acted alone. What's certain is that the night after her burial, her grave was plundered. the grave robber stole 2 earrings that she received from her husband, and just as he was struggling to remove her wedding ring, she awoke. Quickly sitting up, trying to figure out where exactly she was and what was happening, the horrifying reality dawned on Gertrude as she stared into the gravedigger's eyes. He was also thinking quickly in his mind. If she were to escape, she knows who he is and would out him for sure. He and his children's lives would be ruined forever. He didn't spare another thought. Wrapping his fingers around her throat, he pushed her back down into the coffin and strangled her to death. Gertrude had, in fact, not been dead before. She had been buried alive. But the grave robber ensured that this time she was definitely dead. He quickly closed back up the lid and reburied her in the family plot. No one was ever the wiser. Until 1816. The grave robber at this point was on his deathbed at Frederiks Hospital in Belgium. Calling over the hospital's chaplain, he confessed his gruesome deed to the shocked priest, who later, breaking his vow not to share confessions, alerted the authorities. Cut to around 100 years later, the sad story of Gertrude being buried alive had begun to become legend amongst the residents of Copenhagen, passed down through generations. But of course, nobody knew for sure if it was just a morbid rumor or if there was some truth behind it. Finally, one of her descendants, a man by the name of Viggo Stark, applied for permission to open her coffin to finally get some answers. His request was approved, and finally in 1953, on a cold, snowy January day, her grave was exhumed, and what they found was shocking. At complete odds with the normal funeral style, where a body is placed straight with the hands in a devotional pose, Gertrude's body was found with her arms by her side, her spine was curved as if she had shifted her body around, her head was also turned to the side, and one foot was found tucked underneath the other. Certainly no mortician would have placed her in that pose. Furthermore, not a single piece of jewelry was found in the casket, so while it may be technically impossible to prove if she was alive at the time of burial and had later been murdered by the grave robber, it certainly proved that her grave had indeed been plundered. Professor P.O. Pedersen at Copenhagen's Dental College examined the skull during the exhumation and found that the bones in the ear had not been affected by any kind of infection. However, he noted that a wisdom tooth sat crooked and pressed against the neighboring tooth, which could have given Gertrude a very painful root inflammation. So, the theory of taking too much morphine to dull her pain could still be a plausible scenario, and perhaps the doctor mistook her overdosed, comatose state as death. Gertrude was laid to rest for the final time in May 1953, and her story became solidified as true Copenhagen lore. It's got it all: a pretty, rich young woman, her tragic, untimely death, and a mystery that spanned for generations. Stay tuned throughout October. I have so much planned for you guys, including spooky field trips around Copenhagen, Copenhagen ghost stories, and much, much more. It's going to be a scream. Even if you didn't grow up with Halloween yourself, hopefully the videos this month will give you a little bit of that Halloween spirit that I love so much. Thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.